All right. So we're at 6:05, so I reckon we should get started. Just give me 1 minute. All right. So, hi everyone. My name's Emily. I'm a PhD candidate at the University of Melbourne and an occasional dabbler in photogrammetry. So, I'm going to be your host for tonight for uh, our panel, Photogrammetry Myths. I just want to go over some quick Zoom rules before we get started properly. And I think Simon has also posted these in the chat. So by attending today, you agree to follow the CAA International's Code of Behaviour, which, as I said, Simon's posted, but the basics are please mute yourself, turn your camera off, and be respectful to our panellists and to each other. So everyone's aware, the first part of this panel tonight, which is the structured Q&A component with our panellists, is going to be recorded, and it's being recorded right now. So we'll be uploading that part onto our CAA Australasia YouTube channel in case you're keen to watch it again after or share it with any friends, family and colleagues who might be interested in the topic. I'd like to open our event by acknowledging the traditional owners of the lands on which each of us meet. I recognise that I'm hosting this panel from the country of the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung people of the Kulin Nation, and I also recognise the traditional owners of the countries and places from where you all listen. I'd like to pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and extend that respect to all First Nations people listening here today. Before we get started officially with our panel, I would like to make a few small announcements. Firstly, by introducing who we are. So CAA Australasia are the regional branch for CAA International, where the CAA part stands for Computer Applications and Quantitative Methods in Archaeology. Our membership base encompasses Asia, Australia and the Pacific, and we hold numerous events throughout the year focusing on all things digital in the archaeology and cultural heritage space, as well as offering the opportunity to connect and to celebrate all the researchers working in this area in our corner of the world. If you enjoy the panel tonight and you're keen to get more involved in the in Digital Archaeology Fund, it's completely free to join CAA Australasia. So you can just jump onto our website using the QR code on the screen. And if you want to know more about us and follow our work, you can also check us out on social media. So we've got Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Discord, and YouTube channel details up on the current slide. And I think Simon's also posted that information in the chat, so you can check it out. We also wanted to quickly flag our next event, which is coming up at the end of November. So that's going to be a symposium held in collaboration with the Melbourne Data Analytics Platform at the University of Melbourne. It's going to be a hybrid event, so both in-person and virtual participation is possible. And the focus will be on data-driven interdisciplinary research. So we're going to release some more details about that in due course. Including a detailed program, but for the time being, mark Friday the 29th of November in your calendars. But for now, let's officially kick off our current event. So just to go over the format for tonight, we'll be beginning with the structured Q&A with our 4 panellists. So I'll be quizzing them on all things photogrammetry, including some common misconceptions about the field. After this, we'll be opening up the floor so that you guys have the chance to ask panellists any questions you might have. Your questions can be posted in the chat. So this can be at any time throughout the panel. You don't have to wait until the end, or you can raise your hand when we get to the open Q&A part, and one of the moderators will direct you to unmute when it's your turn. So who are our 4 panellists tonight? Let me introduce Tom Keep, an archaeologist and PhD candidate at the University of Melbourne in Australia. Corey Noxon, an archaeologist and assistant professor at Ritsumeikan University in Japan. Michael Rampey, a professional photogrammetrist and lecturer at Macquarie University in Sydney, Australia. And Madeline Robinson, an archaeologist and PhD candidate at the University of Sydney. Between them, they have a wealth of experience in photogrammetry. And for those who are new to this space, photogrammetry is essentially the process of capturing photographic images of particular objects or locations, then stitching these together using specialised software to produce 3D digital models of those objects or locations in the images. As we'll hear tonight, it's something that has plenty of applications in the archaeology and heritage space and is coming more and more into use. But but I'll quickly hand over to each of our panelists to talk a little bit more about their work. So let's start with you, Madeline.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining. It's really exciting to see so many people coming to talk about photogrammetry and the myths that surround it. I'm Madeline. I'm an archaeology PhD student at the University of Sydney. And I'm also the archaeology support officer here in the discipline. And I've done it for a number of years. I share the role now with Simon, who is behind the scenes organizing this panel. So a little bit about my photogrammetry career. We've actually got to go back about 10 years ago, and I was first introduced to photogrammetry underwater. I did a maritime archaeology course at Flinders University, and we were literally dropped into the deep end where we had to scuba dive and shoot a submerged shipwreck and then model it. And I was really just so taken with the technology that, at the time, I was actually an undergraduate student, and I was doing marine science and archaeology. And I was volunteering in the marine science department, and I got brought into a project where we had to model huge expanses of the barrier reef, the Great Barrier Reef. And that was just to monitor coral reef health and fish population health over time. So I did that for a number of years, and I really became very experienced with how the tech worked, how to collect good data, how to process really large landscapes of model materials. So I felt very prepared to undertake my honours research project, which was actually to model the Maltese Neolithic temples, which is what you're actually currently seeing on the screen now, even though it might be a bit janky with the connection. That project was to assess the engineering. I was doing more of an engineering reconstruction analysis of these temples. But since then, I became a research assistant for Professor Peter Hiscock at the University of Sydney, and I was employed to create hundreds of models of stone tools. And I was also employed to train students in photogrammetry. And over the years of designing and creating these different methodologies to model these stone tools, and I amassed quite a considerable amount of teaching material. So my boss, Peter Hiscock, said to me, why don't you write a beginner's manual to photogrammetry for archaeology students? Which I did, and it's just been released. It got released on the 1st of August this year, which was really exciting after so many years of putting it together. So if you are interested in purchasing it, you can get the PDF online or get a hard copy. Just feel free to scan the QR code on the screen. You can get it from Sydney University Press. You can also get it from Dymocks and Nile Books, I'm pretty sure. But since doing the book and teaching and training and working for Peter as an RA, I've been working in the discipline of archaeology. I've been on a number of projects in Australia doing rock art, overseas in Sri Lanka and in Saudi Arabia doing more landscape and close range and macro photogrammetry. I've been training honours and postgraduate students for their research projects. What else are we doing? I've also worked with the Chowchat Wing Museum, creating an online catalogue of museum material. So it's been quite a hectic couple of years, and until now I'm doing my PhD in actually large-scale landscape analysis. And so now we've actually sort of gone from macro and close range to satellite imagery and seeing if I can model using satellite imagery as well. I've just got my sub 25 kilo UAV remote pilot's license. I'm hoping to do some LiDAR modeling as well. So, because we've just actually got a yellow scan UAV LiDAR drone in the discipline. So yeah, it's been a really interesting journey for me, from going underwater to close range to macro to large scale landscape modeling. So that's a little bit about me. And I'm so happy to see so many people wanting to talk about the awesome tech that is photogrammetry. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Madeline. I'm going to hand over to Corey next.
All right. Hey, everybody. Corey Noxon. I'm an assistant professor at Ritsumeikan University in Kyoto, Japan. Next slide here as we direct. Been involved in a number of different photogrammetry-related objects as far as kind of a number of different scales, as far as scanning kind of larger environmental scans, smaller structure scans, a number of different artifact scans, which I'll talk about here in just a second. There's just a couple examples. If If we go over to the next one here, some of the environmental scans. Let's see here. I was involved in a project doing some 3D scanning of some of the stone circle sites in northern Japan, which tied in with the Stonehenge project, which was pretty neat. The bottom left is the Washinoki site, which was kind of cool that it was under excavation when we scanned that. A couple smaller excavations in the upper right as far as Trents, where we're doing multiple scans as we dug things out. I'm trying to think. I think the one over to the upper right ties in with some burial pottery, which I'll talk about in a second. That's the Sugisawa site. And the bottom, let's see here, bottom right there, that's the Oyu stone circle, which is part of a twin stone circles up in Akita Prefecture, which was a bit of a challenge, but also a lot of fun to scan. Next slide here. For some of the artifacts recently, I've been doing some scanning. There's a really interesting site in the northern end of Lake Biwa, which is the largest lake in Japan. The Tsuzurozaki site, where for about 80 years, they've been pulling up pottery in nets here, and it's collected, and there's a museum where they have a collection of these that are displayed that we've gone through and kind of scanned as we've gone along here. They've actually had some underwater UAVs go and kind of survey some of the area, which you see the pictures there. If we go over to the next slide, you see some of the scans involved with them. It's pretty interesting. The soil in the area is iron rich, and so these pots, which some of them date back to 7,000 years, where basically the soil and water surface meet, you're getting these lacustrine iron deposits that are built up over time. The pieces are kind of fragile; they can fall off pretty easily. So these are things that most of the public really couldn't handle or do much with. But through 3D scanning, you're able to kind of look around through the models and get a good look at them, which is pretty fun, pretty cool. I'll go over. Let's see here. Next, this was fun and painful here. I mentioned the previous dig site. We found basically burial pottery that we decided to go and basically run through multiple scans, basically getting all of the different pottery sherds kind of in situ there. And then I went through and scanned about 180 or so individual sherds and placed them back in. That model on the right basically is showing all of the different sherds basically in the correct position and orientation that we found them without the soil there. And that's kind of a fun, neat model to play around with and kind of view kind of the depositional nature of it and basically how these collapsed in time. On to the next one here. Oh yeah, so there's a couple pit house scans, which I've been doing of pit house reconstructions and then using those models to do some material and energy cost estimates related to residential mobility at the time. And if we go to the end, we'll see the videos. We'll see if it holds up okay here. Yeah, a little chunky here, but these are some quick turntable scans of the inside and outside of these. And actually this one here, in a second, it'll link out. They actually ended up tearing down this structure here just recently. It had started to lean a little bit. So I was able to get scans early on as far as outside and inside, and then kind of that last piece before it was taken down, which was, again, pretty neat, pretty fun. And that's it. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Corey. I think next we have Michael.
Cool. Thanks. I've got 100 objects in 3 minutes, so they're all out of context. I just thought I'd show a bunch of stuff you can do. I heard the word photogrammetry 10 years ago. That was the first time I heard it. Sort of fell in love with it from then, struggled with it for 5 years and spent the last 5 years or so trying to master it. My undergrad was in imaging, so I did photography. I did filmmaking, I did design 30 years ago, and I've sort of carried through pictures and computers through my whole career. Early in my career, I was a visual effects supervisor. I used to make television commercials for, getting rid of my soul. And now I work at university. So I do a bit of teaching. I do a lot of work on online education, but really, I've been pushing 3D for the last 10 years. So it's sort of I heard about it from a wonderful colleague, Jan Tristan, who some of you may or may not know. He's an incredible Egyptian archaeologist, and to me, it was magic. Like everyone, the first thing I did was took a whole lot of photos in my lounge room and plugged them into Photoscan at the time, and it didn't really work, and it was blobby, and I'm like, wow, that's hard. But over the years, I pushed it. I pushed it to understand the technology, and that's I think the key for everyone here. You need to understand how it works at a fairly core level to master it. It's simple to learn, hard to master, like pretty much any craft. So yeah, let's call it 9 years ago, we were dabbling in this. We were using laser scanners. We made some 3D stuff, and the question was, how do we use them in learning? That was the question at the time. And at the time, we were using 3D PDFs with Adobe Flash, and it was a horrible, archaic world we lived in. So I started investigating web technology, and it's funny, at the same year that Sketchfab did and Smithsonian did. So all together in 2014, 2015. We released Pedestal, which is now a spun out technology we sell to a lot of people to show 3D. And Sketchfab and Smithsonian have been pushing along as well. And, competition's good. About 5-6 years ago, I'd been doing all this stuff in a university, and I started to get approached by museums and commercial. So it was Australian Museum was one of the first that asked me to scan the Canalda fish fossils. So they challenged me, can you scan 70 tons of fossils in 5 days? And I said, sure. I didn't have any idea how to scan 70 tons of fossils in 5 days, but I did it, and I delivered that job. And from one job, you buy a camera, and you get another job, and from there you get a computer, and you get another job and a drone, and all the rest. So long story short, I incorporated Rampy Realistic Imaging about 2 years ago. So that's a formal corporation in Australia that I do photogrammetry services. I do scanning as a service, processing as a service, consulting, training, all of that. And I kept my day job by some magic mystery of the world where I do still work at Macquarie, and I do still teach students, and I do still refine the process. And I think that's 3 minutes. I made my video 3 minutes, so I'm right on 3 minutes. So really keen to talk to you all this evening. Thanks.
Excellent. Thank you, Michael. And last but not least, we have Tom.
G'day everyone. Yep, my name is Tom Keep. As you can see here, I'm a PhD candidate at the University of Melbourne, where I'm researching the use of 3D reconstructions of rural archaeological sites to display within virtual reality. And obviously, photogrammetry plays a pretty big part of that. Separately, I also have a position as the Digital Data and Research Support Officer at the University of Melbourne. I'm not quite sure what that title means, but I get to play around with a lot of the 3D models, which is always fun. Helping out some evaluation studies of how they're being used within classroom teaching, and also trying to develop some guidelines for how models can be used more effectively, and how we can do something about the metadata, which is a particular pet peeve of mine, if I'm going to be perfectly honest with you. Separately, I also work as a freelance archaeologist and photogrammetrist. Here are a couple of the projects that some of the earlier projects I worked on. The Jezreel Valley Regional Project, that was an excavation in Israel, where I was only there for the one season, but I helped them out with their 3D modeling of both the site and the artifacts. But the big one was really the Hellenic Museum, where I was able to arrange a 6-month internship funded by the federal government, which is very nice of them, where I was basically digitizing as much of their collection as I could get done in that time. And we got about 80 models or so done. I was really learning what I was doing along the way. So that's how I started getting more invested in things. On the next slide, we can see that separately, I also produce most of the 3D models for the Faculty of Arts collections, which are hosted on Pedestal 3D. Michael's great creation there. So now I would say certainly all of the ones you see on your screen were created by myself, and probably most of the ones before then as well. I'd encourage you to check that out while I'm chatting. And the next slide, I've just come back from about 2 months of excavation in Italy, where I was working on the Mazzuolo Archaeological Project, where I've been working since 2017. And that's really where I started progressing from someone who has a basic interest in 3D modeling. It was when I first saw it used on an archaeological site in 2017. And gradually, each season I came back, I became more invested in it. And now I'm the guy who does the 3D modeling stuff, as well as some of the GIS and so forth. And I was also working at a survey project down in the south of Calabria, where we made some models of stone tools in an earlier season. Right now, my kind of research interest outside of my PhD, because I love doing things that aren't my PhD, is trying to combine photogrammetry with other digital analysis methods. So on the left here, you can see a combination of photogrammetry and decorrelation stretching, which is an image enhancement technique that rock art specialists have been using for about 20 years now. It makes faded pigments much more visible, so it's super useful for analyzing rock art, obviously. And I've been working with Ben Gunn and Jake Goods, some rock art sites in the Grampians, to apply this technique to the entire 3D model rather than just to a single 2D photograph. And on the right there, you can see a combination of photometric stereo and photogrammetry to get some kind of closer resolution on the fine surface details of things. I think on the next slides, we've got, a few models. Michael suggested starting out with like showing a few of the models. And I thought it'd be good to kind of give you a chronological overview. This is one of the first models that I made when I was just getting interested in it and I didn't have any of the equipment, or at least when I didn't have any of my own equipment. And I just, bought a cheap DSLR camera and had a go at myself. And, this is the kind of standard that you can hope to work towards if you're just getting started with photogrammetry. It's not good, but it's not bad either. But the next one was when I got started with the Hellenic Museum. I think this was the first model that I felt really proud of. In retrospect, the way I did it was dreadful and silly and way over the top, but it did produce a good enough result. And then finally, on the next slide, we can see one of the recent models that I produced. This looks pretty ugly, but wait for it. Wait for it in just a second. Oh, there we go. So this is an example of the kind of detail you get from that combination of photogrammetry with photometric stereo that I was talking about before. So this is one of the case studies that I often point to, toggling it on and off just like that. And I think that's all I've got for you at the moment. Yep, so that's me. Thanks very much.
Awesome. Thank you so much, guys. Well, with those introductions done, I think we'll get started on the panel. So, the first of our photogrammetry myths that we'd like to address tonight is the notion that photogrammetry is just too hard to learn. I know this is definitely a feeling that I had when I first came across photogrammetry and I wanted to learn how to do it as a part of my own PhD research, but I just didn't really know where to start. So I'd like to open up to the panel and ask, what resources are out there for beginners? Do you have to teach yourself, or is it something that universities are actually including in their course offerings? If anyone would like to jump in.
I'm happy to go first. Oh,
Yes.
Nope, go for it.
all right, great. I think it was certainly harder to learn quite a while ago. Nowadays, it's pretty easy because there are a lot of online resources and a lot of universities are starting to teach it, not usually as a complete subject, with the exception of Macquarie, which does have an internship program, which I hear is very wonderful. But a lot of universities now are at least having like a guest lecturer in. So often, I think there's now 3 universities where I regularly give a guest lecture on just photogrammetry and a little quick workshop. So there's a starting place for most people at least, but there are so many things available on YouTube, which is frankly where I went to do most of what I do now.
Do you think universities are doing enough on that front, Tom?
No. No, not really. I think it's still usually something that's thrown in. I mean, I would like to see it incorporated as an option for higher level students. I think it's great to have one lecture included in a subject for undergraduates, but it'd be really great to see, well, something like an internship program or have it as an option that, you can combine it with something like geospatial sciences for people who are learning GIS systems, to have photogrammetry be a component of that if you're doing a PhD or a master's or an honors degree. That'd be really good.
Does anyone else have any suggestions for other resources out there apart from what you can get at university or YouTube videos?
Well, my book's going to be coming out soon. You can access that. That's literally, it's for complete beginners. It will tell you actually how to set up your camera to how to shoot everything, because it's something I would have appreciated 10 years ago when I was learning. And because I have trained a lot of students in photogrammetry, and can I say, because we don't, at University of Sydney, we don't have a digital archaeology class or course, but a lot of students are very interested in the tech. That part of my job at the moment, we're actually going to create some video series on how to set up a camera, how to shoot for photogrammetry, and how to process through Metashape, because I have such a influx every year. I will get so many students coming in. So even just as a foundational introductory video, that's what we're going to provide for students. Just so I don't have to train people over and over again, especially going from the foundations of, how to set up a camera. Yeah, that's what we're kind of doing to fill the gap. But it is unfortunate that we don't have it as an integral part of a digital archaeological course. You find out sort of tacitly through any sort of research project that's going on. If there's an excavation going on in field school, someone's going to be on the team doing photogrammetry, and that's kind of how you find out about it. But hopefully in the future it will just become a staple. But the access to apps, as Tom was saying before, on your phone, it's fab. You don't have to know anything. They tell you what to do on those apps, and you do it for free, which is great. It's a really good introduction to sort of how the whole process works and what you need to do, and that's a good foundation if you want to take it further and you want to invest in better camera gear and better software. So, but I think everyone sort of agrees that it should be part of university archaeology training, because it's such a cornerstone for what we do now, in my opinion.
Yeah. Amazing. Sorry, Mr. Dudley's causing havoc.
Apologies, everyone.
Corey, I'm interested in obviously we're coming from an Australian university perspective, so working in the university system in Japan, do you guys have a different experience over there with the level of adoption for photogrammetry?
No, I think you're dealing about the same. So I've sat in, done some guest lectures here and there with classes, and I think there's probably the same disconnect all over, as far as there's a lot of interest from the students for these kind of subjects, but universities aren't quite to the point of really kind of pushing this out yet. Hopefully that'll change soon, but yeah, I think probably similar issue all over the place.
Yeah, my only look, I think it is hard to learn. It isn't a simple thing. It isn't, picking up a social media platform. There's a lot of complex stuff. There's a lot of mathematics. There's a lot of understanding. But that's to master it, to get to a point where you can use it professionally. We can use it in research with trusted data, because that's what we're talking about. So kind of like Tom showed, his early one. We all start there, but then to master it can be difficult. I think there's a few traps. My traps were currency. Especially when I started, there was a lot. I'd like to say 90% of the articles I read were false at worst, misleading to a degree, because some processes that had worked for some persons weren't the right process, and actually misinterpreted the way to do it. And I mean, compound that with how quick the software is moving, especially some of the key commercial bits of software. They're adapting very quickly now. So even a guide from 2 or 3 years ago is out of date now. So currency is really important, and that makes it also hard to learn and hard to master. In our internship at Macquarie, I have student-led guides, and we're constantly updating them. They're in Google Drive. They're live documents. It's not like I can write a guide and that's the guide forever. One of the jobs for the interns is to fix the guide every 6 months, because language changes or options change, and I could talk about a bit of that later on some of those gotchas that I got. But yeah, the biggest one was some of the tutorials I read that literally just didn't work. And looking back now, on some of the ones, especially from 9 or 10 years ago, I spent a lot of time, and I like to wonder how many people spent time on those, didn't get a result, walked away altogether. So I think there is a element of being an autodidact and teaching yourself when you get stuck that is important here.
I think that segues nicely into my next question, actually, which is how standardized are current approaches to photogrammetry and archaeology? So is there a strictly correct way to do things, or do you think we benefit from having more diverse approaches and experimentation happening?
I would say in my experience working now at, I think there'd be maybe 4 or 5 projects I've worked on, which have had photogrammetry as being a pretty integral part of their workflow, and they've always been completely different from one another.
Right.
So standardized, absolutely not.
Yeah.
Everyone seems to this point to have made it up as they went along and found out what worked for them. And I think that's why we kind of need these guides to be created, but also maybe need like a central, not regulatory body, but like a guide of best principles and best standards
Yeah.
to work towards.
I think there are some key foundational aspects as far as Madeline was talking about, as far as setting up your camera and this and that, being able to take decent pictures that are clear, well exposed, aren't blurry, anything like that. Understanding concepts of proper coverage and overlap, I think, are something that kind of carry over. But again, depending on the project you do, that'll work on simple basic objects, but then there's always going to be some curveballs that come in there, and that's something that isn't as easy to kind of provide a generalized guide for, because there's so many different type of situations. So yeah, it's tricky. There's some core foundational bits, but there's always going to be something to mess you up.
Well, I'd argue that's how you learn, and that's good. You should embrace those. That's why, you should never have the answer that I can't do photogrammetry. My answer is always I can try. Some of those, like the artworks are my favorite. Like I do Art Express every year. I launched one today, the 5th Art Express virtual gallery, if you want to go look at it, which is high school artworks. And scanning kids' artworks is nuts. Like there's weird shapes and strange materials and texturality, and you're challenged with things that aren't a brick. And I always like to joke about the brick. Like if I get given a brick, yeah, I use the same method every single time and it will work first go. Absolutely easy. Bricks, easy. And then everything is, more or less brick-like to a degree, whereas a big battleship is, maybe 1 on 10 to the brick scale, whereas, something like a pot is more 7 out of 10 like a brick. But I'm being a bit glib, but at the same time, yeah, it's by jamming with it and then failing and trying other things. And like Corey says, follow the 3 rules. The angular rule, the scale rule, and the overlap rule that we can talk about again multiple times. Like once you learn those, you learn coverage, you learn how to approach it, and that's yeah. But yeah, you're right, Tom. Like every time you hit something, it's different, and some of the ones that you think are going to be easy are actually hard. Some of the ones you think are going to be hard actually end up easier. I really love that. I love that as part of the process, and that's where I think it really is a craft. It's not a take photos, push a button, and it's a robot that does all the work. No, this is we're craftspeople here. Like we're learning the tools of the trade and we're applying them, in different ways to create and to jam on that. Yeah.
Can I just say that's exactly right. When it depends on the environment which you're shooting as well. You may not always be inside in a lab or in a light box. Having to shoot outside with no light or limited light, it's you have no idea what situation you're going to be shooting in. If you can't control any of your environment, there's no real standardized protocol to follow because you can't control all these variables. So it's trying to deal with what you've got with the equipment that you've got, what you're trying to model, its shape, size. You're trying to fit these core fundamental things of overlap and those kind of those foundational things to try and create a model. Like make sure you capture all the surface morphology that you want to digitally recreate, but you have to battle all the situational things that are going on, and that's what makes it interesting. And it kind of does feel like almost like a bit of an art form. And I do get annoyed with people like, oh yeah, it's so easy, just take a photo and then there you go. It's like, well, just wait till you're trying to shoot something underwater when you're, and not even like that's the extreme when you've got a tank on your back and you're trying to balance your buoyancy. But doing microliths, I could worked on them for years and I still, each one, there's a new interesting thing that just stumps me and you have to really think about it. It's creative, it's flexible. Photogrammetry is flexible. You have to be flexible to approach it. You can't think of it as being a black and white process, which is lovely, which is great. It means it's never boring. I've never been bored on a project ever, which is hilarious because I've had days I've been shooting for basically 8 hours straight and then processing at the same time. But you have to have a really open mind when you approach this tech.
Amazing. Excellent. Well, I think that covers that there's definitely some good places to start with learning photogrammetry. But there is also some flexibility and creativity that comes with the process as well, once you get the foundations down pat. So I think we'll move on to our next myth. So I'm sure there's many out there who, especially after listening to some of that, feel that photogrammetry might be super expensive with all the equipment and software that seems to get used as a part of the process. Or more specifically, maybe what it might sound like is high quality photogrammetry is super expensive. So maybe we can talk a little bit about the basics required, equipment and software wise, that you need to get started with photogrammetry. If anyone wants to jump in.
Yeah, I'll have a go, sure. You need to take photos. So you need a device to take photos. That's the input. So the input stage is photos. Simple as that. With or without light, there's all different ways to do that. A lot of people use it with their phone cameras. There's a lot of open apps. I used to remember 123D Catch was one of the really early ones by Autodesk that just made it easy to learn how to take photos the right way. Yeah, you need a computer. You need something that can do fairly high-end graphics work. But then again, a normal computer will do it just slower. So again, you don't need the most expensive computer, but you're buying something kind of mid-range gaming is if you're trying to get something off the shelf. I chase the genie of bottlenecks, and eventually you buy more processors and then RAM and then drives and then graphics cards, and everything keeps going up. But yeah, you need that. And then you need the software. The software isn't ridiculously expensive anymore. I mean, reality capture is free. Metashape's trivial when it comes down to cost at the student level for the standard version. There are other free options. That's really the entry level. So yeah, but again, yeah, I think you're dead right. Once you start to push quality, just like filmmaking or just like photography itself, like technical photography, yeah, things go up. Things go up, and that investment has a return, of course. The better equipment, the better lights, the better compute you have, the better output you get at the other end. But that's not learning. Like learning, getting started, like we all did, we used what we had because we all started for free. And then again, and I know one of the questions is about commercial. As you move into commercial, like I said in the intro, you start to invest strategically in different areas to improve quality tangibly. For your value proposition. So it's a different kind of question. You don't just buy all the best because the best is going to make you a better photogrammetrist. No, you buy it because that's the result you need for that client, or that's the result you need for that research. It's a different question. And I'll just finish on laser scanners are expensive. CT scanners are expensive. Photogrammetry is relatively cheap in the grand scheme of things when you talk about digitisation.
But the nice thing as well is that, sorry to cut you off.
You go.
If you're going to invest in photography gear, you can also just use it as photography gear. That has this dual purpose where you can use it for photogrammetry, but you can also use it for other things. With your like a decent gaming computer, you can use it for gaming as well. That's the nice thing about the stuff that like the gear and the kit we use. I would say in my experience, you can do photogrammetry very cheaply. You can buy secondhand gear. Facebook Marketplace, great for secondhand cameras. Like that's awesome. You can also get light boxes quite cheaply. I will plug, if anyone's looking for portable light boxes, the Foldio system is excellent. It's really good. I've been using it for years. The app for the Foldio 360 turntable is great. You can take them in the field, and they're really good. So you can do it really cheaply, but you can opt for going for more expensive side of things. I would say for anyone who is thinking about getting camera kit, if you're going to focus on one area to splurge on, I don't know what you guys think, but in my experience, and my background is also in photography, I would invest in lenses. That's the thing that you go for. You get a good body if you can afford it, sure. But the lens is going to be the thing that's that's the thing to focus on. I have so many lenses, and I love lenses. I could own them all, and I love testing them out and trying them out and seeing what they produce. But if you want to have a good imagery, go for a good lens. Yeah.
I think there's an old adage that kind of holds up there as far as you can do something cheaply, quickly, or with high quality, and you basically choose 2 out of the 3. And so if you don't have money but have a bit of extra time, to go at it, you can balance these things. I think if you go on to, and probably Michael can attest to this, over to commercial, or you're dealing with bigger projects where you have more of a time crunch, well, then adding some extra money to the issue can speed these things along. But I think there's a number of different angles which you can come into, and it doesn't necessarily require a ton of money to go in. And I think that can be balanced as you kind of proceed with what you're doing.
Yeah, but learn how to get value from that spend. I have a lot of expensive equipment, but my favorite equipment's still my IKEA $20 turntable that I can go as fast as anyone. I'd race any automated turntable head to head any day, and that's still my favorite bit of kit that I use this week, last week, every week. So it's about learning, when like Maddie says, where you spend and the benefit of that spend. There's anyone can go buy the most expensive computer there is, but is that going to give you the benefit? There's a classic one with multiple graphics cards years ago that was debunked. You add more graphics cards, it doesn't get linearly faster. You add a second graphics card, it's only 20% faster, and that's double your money. And you add a third, it's only 10% faster again, that's triple your money. So, there's lessons like that you do need to learn the mastery of how it actually works to get that value out of the spend as well.
Yeah, I think basically everything I ended up buying was always me trying to overcome a problem that I was having. So, when you start out, you have the most basic camera. You could use your phone if you want to. And then after a while, you start wondering, why does it look like this? Why am I having problems with this kind of object? And I ended up wasting a lot of money buying things that didn't fix the problem, but some of them did fix the problem. So you kind of acquire kit as you're going along based on the needs at the time. And I would just say, wait until you have the need for something. Don't just buy something preemptively.
Mm-hmm. Definitely test it out before if you have the opportunity to test something out before making a financial commitment. I've been stung by that before. Yeah.
Maybe I just want to pick up a little bit more on the software side of things as well. So Michael, you mentioned that there are some free options out there as well as some paid ones.
Yep.
Do you guys want to talk a little bit about sort of the differences between those? So can you use a free software that's just as good as one of the paid versions?
Well, reality capture became free for anyone that's earning less than $1 million in your company, and that's recent.
Yeah.
So it's been a very quick move of Epic Games taking over the world with Fortnite dollars. And but reality capture now for anyone, even if you're in an actual company. And I put over 10 grand into reality capture enterprise, and then all of a sudden it's free. So that's an interesting one that actually is commercial software that's free, and they're trying the Autodesk model, where if you give it away for free to low-end users or students, which is what Autodesk does, when they matriculate up to high-end industry, they're the ones using that software.
Okay.
So when I say free, I don't mean not commercial. I mean, that actually is commercial. Reality capture is used in a lot of commercial senses. But Metashape might as well be free. It's under $100 for the student license of the standard version. That's cheaper than any camera or computer you're buying. Like it's trivial.
Yeah, I continue to use Metashape, the professional edition, because I paid for it. So I want to keep using it. I have it now, and I learned on it. That's what I'm most familiar with. All the little tricks that I've learned over the years apply specifically to Metashape. If I had my time over, now that reality capture is free and seems to be doing just as good a job as Metashape, I would 100% be learning on that instead. And it has kind of blown out. I suppose there's probably still a place for the open source ones, because reality capture isn't open source, it's just free. I suppose that some people probably have a use for these open source processing engines if you're doing something very sophisticated with coding or something like that. Although even with Metashape, you can use Python scripting with it. But now I kind of fail to see why you would want to try using one of the open source alternatives when reality capture is so good, particularly to learn on, because they are very fiddly in my experience. Whereas reality capture and Metashape are pretty user-friendly, significantly more than they were 5 years ago. Now they're much, much easier to use.
I'll put out, like, I appreciated what Alice Vision did with Meshroom as far as putting out some free photogrammetry. Like, some of my first models were done with that, and I was incredibly excited at the time. But it would run kind of slowly, and you'd run into issues that were really hard to troubleshoot and this and that. And yeah, the alternatives got cheaper and cheaper, and now, like you said, you've got better free options there that I think will transition you right into professional settings if that's where you want to go. So yeah, times are changing here for the better, I think.
Amazing. All right, we might move on to our third myth. I think you, yep, thanks, Simon. So for our third myth, especially after what we've seen so far, some of us might be thinking that photogrammetry models look cool, but are they actually, well, they're not very useful perhaps. So hopefully you guys can debunk that a bit for us. So maybe you guys could enlighten us about some of the benefits that access to photogrammetry models can provide in different sectors, so education, museums, or archaeological research.
I'll be happy to go first.
Yep.
I guess I'll talk about in archaeology specifically because that's where I tend to use it the most. I think somebody mentioned in the chat earlier how they're using it now to render the orthomosaics and importing those into GIS programs to create maps. These have been repeatedly demonstrated to be significantly more accurate than hand-drawn maps, traditionally hand-drawn maps. And they also take much less time and they can be done outside of the field. So to me, that's an immediate win. But what I'm more interested in when creating models in the field is the fact that you get to go back to the site as it was mid-excavation from 5 seasons ago. So, recently we were re-excavating an area, well, not re-excavating the area, but excavating an adjacent area where we had excavated many years before. And, we find this feature which seems to be going into the bulk wall, and we want to see how that connects to things that we found previously. And because we've retained all of these models on this site, we make a model at the end of for each square at the end of every day. We can go back, import those old models into the same, into something like Blender or even into Metashape, line them up and see exactly where they connect, whether these are on the same level, and see how these things relate to one another, which is just something you can do it with traditional methods, but it's much easier and less it looks less real. You're working from hand-drawn plans rather than the kind of visual imagery that you remember seeing yourself.
Yep.
That's a big one. That's one reason why I think it's more than a pretty model.
What about from in the education sector, if anyone wants to jump in on that?
Yeah. So my day job's a learning designer, and it's fundamental. And it's funny, the conversation I always used to have with people was, but you need the real object. You need to sit in a room with the real object. You can't learn the same thing with this object. And a long time ago, I learned to flip the conversation. We weren't trying to replace the real object. We were trying to replace a black and white photo of that object. That's what online students were using. They were using a black and white photo. And before photography, what were they using? They were reading something about it. So if you actually look at this philosophically, the utility of data and the utility of digital is about its portability and about the transportability and about the ability that data can be transformed in different ways where the real world can't do those things very well. So from an educational point of view, we really look at it augmenting, we look at it extending. We don't really look at replacing. We absolutely aren't trying to replace these things. We're trying to extend them, reinterpret them. The work I've done with geology's fundamentally demonstrated we've changed teaching rock identification to first-year geology students by digitizing hand samples because they have more time to practice, they have more time to look at identifying minerals. So by the time they get to the assessment, they're actually better at it. So I think you really got to look at utility in those ways. That sort of old weary argument of, but you need the real thing. Yeah, we all know. Everyone here knows that. Like that's it's like I don't even give it airtime anymore. It's like yeah, we know. Like let's move to what we can do with it rather than what it can't do. So I think I've seen that change in 10 years. I've seen that sort of flip, and COVID really flipped it pretty hard, I think. And post COVID, we're in a different world where people are. It's gone from push to pull. It's people get the use of this data in different ways, and that's from everywhere, from education to big museums to private heritage. And I know this is a question. Private archaeology firms, like even construction companies, get this now. So I think it's a really tough question to answer. But my advice to everyone is try and avoid that the vortex of getting sucked down into the where people are replacing the real world. We're not. I'm replacing photographs. That's what I like to say. That's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to replace 2D photographs. Okay. Where we go from here, we'll see.
I think you're absolutely on the market. When people, I've had this said to me before, where people are like, but what's the point of it? Why are you investing in this time to create a model? It's like, what does it do? It's like, well, what does a photograph do? That's what we're trying to do. We're not trying to replace this. It's not some weird substitute where you're going to just have to settle for this digital version. It's providing another avenue for analysis, for perspective. We're opening up different forms and opening up to the world. These things can be disseminated to anyone in the world who's got an internet and a screen. This is not like that. I think the perspective is quite old school, where it's like, oh, even for certain museums, they don't want objects being modeled because they're worried that if someone sees the 3D model, they won't want to come into the museum, which is ridiculous. If anything, it's going to excite you. They're like, oh my God, I've seen this. I know it. I've analyzed it on my phone, on my laptop. I want to go in and see it. In terms of education, having during COVID, when we had OBL, object-based learning classes, it meant the students could continue their assessments looking at material that they were going to look at in their classes. It eased our, it eased our sort of the teaching throughout these like difficult periods. But it just means that, if you're in class looking at the object, you go home, you're going to write up your assessment, you don't have to discontinue or disconnect your association and connection with the object. And in terms of the capabilities, it does extend it. You can get measurements from locations on a feature or landscape or a piece of architecture that you couldn't measure in the field, or even, it allows you to go to a place on the planet that you wouldn't actually physically be able to go and see. But in terms of archaeological analyses, you've got morphometric analyses. I've done engineering myself, and with reconstruction, reconstructing ruins and architecture. Yeah, there's so much. There's so much you can do. So just for me, it's a little bit of an insult when people are like, oh, what is its uses? And it's like, what? That's crazy. It's like Michael said, it's a better version of a photograph. Let's just it's
but then there is the fact that it also does things you can't do. And that's a lot of people are talking about ortho photos. And ortho photos are a picture that can't be taken. It's a perspective-free picture. You can't do that. Tom showed in his intro, doing some of the spectral stuff. That's stuff you can't see. One of my favorites is turning off color. You can't turn off color on an artifact, but turning off color lets you see shapes in a very different way. So you can actually extend it into data can be transformed. Yeah. And the simple fact that data can be transformed opens up these whole new avenues as well. So yeah, it's a really interesting. Corey, sorry to cut you off.
Well, I was about to say, in dealing with photogrammetry, so you've got hundreds of pictures of objects on top of everything else. And not only do you have the 3D model, but if you're talking about documentation, here's the files, go at it. So yeah, I don't see it as much of a negative there.
All right. In the interest of time, and Simon, I am keeping an eye on it, I'm going to kick on to the next myth. So, and this is definitely a statement I've heard plenty of times, that photogrammetry isn't as good as 3D scanning or LiDAR or one of the other options out there. So does anyone have an opinion on that?
Well, when our book comes out, there's a good chapter on this. There is a new book coming out from CAA, which we will publish one of these years. It's apples and oranges. You can't compare them. I still use structured light scanning when I need to. I still use laser scanning when I need to. We use LiDAR when we need to. I use CT when I need to. It's good at some things and not as good at others. That's really where you're at. It's a really tough question, and one I get asked a lot. You don't just pick photogrammetry and then say, I can't use all the rest. You don't. Yeah. But if you were to pick one, photogrammetry is probably the most versatile. When you look at what you can achieve with it, it is the most versatile. It doesn't stop you saying, yeah, this one, I need a laser scanner. I actually need it. Photogrammetry is going to fall apart, or I need to combine this with CT. And that's where photogrammetry really shines, is the ability to combine it with other modalities. And that's quite new. That's over the last 5 years. All the software's jumped on board of bringing in laser scans and bringing in different data modalities to do it together.
Does anyone else have any thoughts on this particular one where you might, so some examples maybe of where you'd choose 3D scanning over photogrammetry or vice versa?
Well, it depends on what your output, what you want your output to be. If you don't want texture or any sort of texture mapping, then and you will have a 3D scanner and you're really invested in accurate morphology, then sure, go for a 3D scanner. But if it's not, if you want to have, you know, your point cloud, you want to have your mesh, your texture, and the ability to create orthophotos and orthomosaics or a DEM, that's what photogrammetry can do. And it is versatile. You can take it underwater. You can do it, you know, large scale, small scale. Obviously you can do that with 3D scanning, but like it's portable, it's movable. You don't have to have it's not restrictive in its environment. And that's good. And it gets everything. It gets morphology, it gets the texture. It's nice, it's easy, and it's cheaper. Yeah. I think we're all biased here, but
I think we are.
I think I'll add something in because, you know, sometimes you hear talk as far as accuracy and precision from it. And photogrammetry, if it's well captured, you know, you can easily get, you know, for smaller objects, you know, sub-millimeter precision in there. But the key is that you have to have captured it well. So you have the flexibility from photogrammetry, but to get, you know, there's a difference between like kind of a general scan and a really good scan. And so there's a little bit of a skill difference in there if that's what you're looking for. But it has the capability. It just it needs a little bit of expertise if you're trying to push to the same level, I think.
Yep. Amazing. All right. I'm really keen to move on to our next myth because this is something I definitely have a lot of interest in. And I think you guys probably all have some strong opinions on this as well. Are there actually any jobs in photogrammetry? Is this something that you can get paid to do as an ongoing career, full time?
Yeah, I'll start. Yes. So A, yes, I do it. I run a company. B, a good chunk of my work is teaching museums now. So I've the State Library, Australian Museum, Queensland Art Gallery, Maritime Museum. I'm teaching their photographers how to do photogrammetry there. So it actually tells you that more and more in the institutions that's happening. I do a lot of commercial work for archaeology firms. So therefore, of course, there's jobs doing it inside those firms as well. Again, like it went from push to pull. People get it now. We're not magicians anymore. So it is a craft. And just like photographers are needed in all of these places, so is photogrammetry now. So absolutely there's jobs. And not just jobs, but there's money to be made if you have the right value proposition and you work out a way to get it to a price point that there's a benefit for that to the organizations. And that's really changed. The graphs have crossed. And the graphs have crossed because of camera technology, because of graphics technology, that being able to push something out in the next day rather than 3 weeks later changed the game. And I think that's, you know, only going to go more so. In 5 or 10 years' time, I'm going to have to pick something else because I actually think it's going to get democratized down to the point like high school kids are learning it. And, you know, like happened to video editing and photography and web design, everything else I've been in my career, you know, it will come in and be democratized sometime in the next 5 to 10 years. So we're right in a sweet spot now of being an expert photogrammetrist. Yes, there's a huge demand.
Would you say it's largely a freelance sort of role still?
No. So it's becoming more institutionalized. It's becoming, especially in your large collecting institutions, it's becoming something that they're bringing into their digitization program. So I don't know if he's here, Tom Peachy, one of my first interns is the digitization officer at the Australian Museum. And it's a key part of his job. And they sort of changed the way they were doing digitization there. And I did a lot of training with the others. So no, I actually think it isn't freelance. It's becoming institutionalized. And there are jobs within these larger organizations right now. But certainly in a lot of the smaller organizations, I see it coming up. I see it coming up in a lot of the heritage collections, a lot of the council collections, a lot of the smaller regional museums. Absolutely, it's happening.
I would say in my experience that I wouldn't regard photogrammetry as my career or even most people's career. My career is being an archaeologist and I suppose pretending to be an academic. And occasionally, my specialty within that is being a photogrammetrist or working with digital data more broadly. You know, it's the biggest string on my bow, I suppose, but it's not the only one there. And I would not recommend trying to only invest in this. You have to have your thing that people understand, and then the thing that they also need to have done, but they don't know how to do. Photogrammetry is a particularly good one because I think, as was mentioned before, a lot of people think that they can do it and then they try and realize that they can't. So a lot of clients that I get are from people who had a real hot go at it and then asked if I can fix their data for them.
Yeah.
It's the most annoying job to receive, but it does pay. So.
Corey, I'm interested as well, again, from your perspective, in Japan too. Is it a similar situation there?
I'm in a similar situation to Tom here, I think, as far as it's a useful skill. I've gotten involved in a lot of these projects basically because I've done 3D scanning in one aspect, and people say, hey, I could use some of that over here. You know, could you jump over here? And so it's provided. Sometimes in archaeology, you talk about kind of having a regional expertise and then some sort of maybe a functional expertise. And the archaeology digital data is definitely one that was a good fit for me. And there's plenty of projects out there to do it. As for coming from the academic sectors, I kind of defer to Michael as far as when you talk about commercial aspects of it, but within academic projects and whatnot, there's a lot to record. So
excellent. Well, we might quickly move on to our final myth because I'm also very keen to talk about this one, and it is a bit of a big one. So for our final myth, I'd suggest that maybe there's a belief out there that the ethics of working with photogrammetry models are less challenging than with physical cultural objects. So I might ask you guys to comment on that. Maybe more specifically, who owns 3D digital representations of cultural objects? Is it the museums where they're housed? Is it the photogrammetrist who produces them? In the case of Indigenous artefacts, is it traditional owner groups? Yeah, I'm interested in that idea of ownership.
Yeah, so I sign a lot of contracts around this, and I've been in the middle of a few legal fights on this. Photogrammetry is most akin to photography. So anything that applies to photography applies here. The argument underlying that is that photogrammetry is a creative work. It isn't a photocopy, right? A photocopy, you push a button, that's not a creative work. It's not covered by copyright because it's a machine-made thing. So the argument in the courts where it's been tested up until now is photogrammetry is a creative work. And I argue that, of course, it is. It's how you take the photos, how you use the software, how you do all the rest. So like photography, it's then negotiated usually in contracts or work done for hire. The copyright of the scan has nothing to do with the ownership of the object. That's the biggest myth, that a lot of cultural institutions think they own the object, therefore they own the copyright of the scan, regardless of who paid for it or who did it or whatever. That's absolutely not true. Same as with photography, absolutely not true. It's a creative work. So the person who creates the creative work owns the copyright at creation in this country. That's it, without registration or anything else. If you're doing it work for hire, which I'm doing it a lot, usually that's ceded to the employer. So therefore, when I'm hired by the museum that will remain unnamed that hired me this week, I turn up, they own the data. The end. I don't have a right to use that as a creative work. And that's it. Like, it's actually separate from the cultural. Like, I think everyone here, we're absolutely, the ethics of cultural use of anything, be it spoken word or histories or photographs or anything, is as pertinent here as it is anywhere else. But at the very core level, copyright is a legal right of a creator. And we are creatives as photogrammetrists. We need to protect our legal rights. And that's how it is. Just like photographers, you hire a photographer to take photos of your kids, or you turn up at your wedding. Same deal. That's what we are.
It's interesting because I've actually read the opposite when I had to look into this, and we're chatting with the Copyright Office of the University of Melbourne. And I have seen court cases. I mean, this is in the United States, so I don't know if it would apply here the same, where the argument is that because a photogrammetry model, if it's done, perfectly and very well executed, should mirror the original object almost perfectly, it's considered to be a slavish reproduction, and so is therefore not a creative work. In the same way that if you take a photograph of a painting that's in the public domain, but you've only, you've just got it as perfectly well lit as possible. You've done nothing with the angle of it. You've done nothing with the shading. That's also in the public domain now, because a lot of museums try to claim that public domain artworks their photographs of them that they put on their online catalogs have to be paid for. But they're considered reproductions, so it doesn't count. But there's a very weird thing that I found, which is that all of the photographs that I take in order to create a photogrammetry model are considered creative works, but then the model itself is not. So it doesn't seem to make an awful lot of sense to me.
Yeah.
But I guess this is legal stuff more than ethical stuff, which is pretty different.
I think that brings up a good point that I don't think it's settled yet, right? As far as it seems to go back and forth. I think it's the legal side of things is trying to catch up with the technology here, and yeah, I don't know. I think there's definitely arguments around, but I don't know if it's quite settled matter yet. So be aware, I guess, of that kind of gray area in there. Yeah.
All I know from my perspective, from working at University of Sydney, that everything I produce as a staff member is owned by the university. I have rights to it, but I was told that anything I produce is theirs. So, yay.
Yeah, work done for hire. You have moral rights, so they're inalienable outside of contracts. So you still have to be said that, Madeline did that 3D scan rather than someone else did it, so you can't misattribute. And that's again with photography, you can't morally misattribute, but that's different to ownership. And the Nefertiti hack, for anyone who wants to read about this from the most classic one, is pretty fundamental. That was the biggest argument around all of this, and all it did was harm.
Yeah.
All it did was harm. It made museums stop scanning. It made people stop sharing. It made everyone more worried about all of this. So yeah, I mean, look into the Nefertiti hack and see what happened with that one if you're really interested in the subtext of that.
All right. I'm going to wrap it up there in terms of me asking you guys questions, I think, and it'd be great if we can open up to the audience for some questions. So, as I said before, feel free to put them in the chat or to raise your hand, and you can ask it directly in person as well. I will have a look through